I had watched a video earlier today by Victor Davis Hanson of the Daily Signal about how the USA has tribal fatigue. I think pretty much the entire white world, and it seems like some places beyond that have tribal fatigue as well. And while I completely agree with him that tribalism simply isn't working out, I do feel that to an extent it is unavoidable, though we should try to minimize that. As with strong weather, some element of it is something that needs to simply be endured, and some can be prevented entirely. Some people point to the past 10 or 20 years, modern wokeness, modern DEI, Black Lives Matter, and stuff like that. But the more you get into politics, the more you start to see that it all started in the mid-90s or so, at least the current iteration of it, with the great machine of modern art glorifying sex and violence, which the mindless masses took as a behavioral lesson, like a fool who hears a tale of morality and thinks that Hansel and Gretel was a true story. They took Hollywood's message to heart. But Hollywood no longer has the reins. We now live in the wild west of social media, activist judges, R18 safe for work websites, liberal teachers, and brain-dead children. The video itself is just me playing Ultra Kill. I've barely played any shooters lately, so I'm going to be trash at it. Enjoy. Now, the most obvious iteration of tribalism in the world would have to be skin color, and long did the world scoff at the USA regarding the natives and the slavery of Africans. Despite the natives warring with each other and having their own African slaves, the Africans, enslaved even unto this day by their own people, and plenty of other countries also having African slaves way back when, but thanks to Hollywood, there seems to be this pervasive feeling that racism was a uniquely white American thing throughout the entire civilized world, which, through globalism and time, eventually transmogrified into a sin that any white person is guilty of. Then came the Pakistanis. They're the go-to scapegoat anyway in the UK's war against immigration, but obviously they aren't the only ones there, the only people immigrating, the only people causing problems. And then suddenly, with the curtain pulled back and the scheme to flood the Western countries with immigrants being revealed, and I'm honestly still shocked about the call-out against the UN for this, everyone is starting to realize that people who are too different cannot unify, at least not entirely. Voltron cannot assemble through liberal tiers alone, and people naturally segregate themselves based on color, based on what they can see. The result of this is obviously that no matter if those two people might be best friends or could be best friends, their awareness of the difference in their skin color causes them to act differently around one another. This isn't something a liberal with a megaphone can fix. It's really only solved by intelligence, the intelligence that allows you to see past any kind of culture, any kind of tribalism, and accept that everyone can be the same if they all have the same level of intelligence. But intelligence is not something that can be forced upon someone. And this brings the train of thought, mine at least, to the concept of cultures and religions. Firstly, the tribe of cultures, which most can interact well enough in day-to-day life, but if the country's culture is too fractious, it impacts various social elements like hobbies or romance, and after generations of enclavization, those cultures can become outright hostile towards anyone who isn't just like them. The myth is that you can take a good person from anywhere, and they'll fit in anywhere, but the reality is that a good person might not fit into somewhere else even if they're surrounded by other good people. They might even become a bad person after the culture shock of moving to a new country. Now, I enjoyed social studies in school, but I'm no scholar, so speaking purely about what is known to me, Black people have been in America for far longer than anyone could reasonably argue is needed for one group to assimilate into another, and while some have, what we see in large volume is Black Americans creating their own cultures, antagonistic to the rest of America, or the world, really, with racial tensions now reaching a critical boiling point as far away from assimilation as possible. Well, I say reaching, but it's more like social media has now given us a window into how many of them have likely always felt. While the majority of Black people will hold the door open for you and tell you to have a nice day, many even calling out ghetto fatigue as well, there is a fraction of Black culture that has, in its enclaves, become hostile towards its own country, its own people even. And people call this ghetto or hood mindsets, but the social media has really made all mentalities intercontinental. That ghetto need not be a physical place. It now exists wherever someone sympathizes with it. The amplifier of social media has truly laid all bare. Black supremacy, Africa supremacy, slavery is fetishized, a foreign country full of foreign people is idolized, and an imaginary future forms in their mind which is glorified, one where they either take over America or one where they move back to Africa. Neither will occur, and this negative culture will merely remain as an unhealing wound upon America, the country that they are a citizen of, for so long as that persists. You can see similar things happening to lesser extents in other instances. Obviously, Asians in Chinatown is an old example that everyone should know, but recently the Indians in Texas went viral for forming an enclave and changing America's culture into their own. But as there are so many black people consolidated to specific reasons, it's a very obvious sequence of events that's very impossible to ignore without intentionally blinding and deafening yourself to what's right in front of you. Of course, it's not just cultures that form enclaves and the resulting tribal mindset. Religions are rather famous for trying to conquer the world, which is the final form of an enclave. Just as there are entire cities in the south of the USA which are now completely black, there are cities which are completely Jewish or completely Muslim, such as Dearborn, Michigan. There's not much to say about religion because the entire purpose of religion is to dominate and control people. They are, in effect, a disease, and disease can only spread or be eradicated. Usually people choose the latter, but to be tolerant, humans prefer the former. This is only different to any other form of tribalism being tolerated specifically because religion exists to spread and conquer. Jamal from the Bronx is kind of just doing his own thing, and whatever happens, it is just his own thing. Whereas religion, well, they want the entire world to be their enclave. And on the topic of wanting control, classes are another form of tribalism, the aristocracy and the peasants. However, as with Alaskans and Nigerians, the truly rich people rarely intermingle with the truly poor people. However, class tribalism is most viewed, or at least easily viewed, through the lens of celebrities, obviously, who, in their need for attention, do actually interact with the common folk through, you guessed it, social media, by vomiting up their trained political beliefs after living in the echo chamber of Hollywood, which, as the end point of capitalism, is automatically democratic, to a rather comical extreme in that case. Proper rich people, if I had to guess, would be far more conservative. Obviously, they don't want to share their wealth, but you don't get rich without being able to weigh the risks and make the right call. Well, I guess unless you're a Nepo baby. And similarly to celebrities living in the pink, white, and blue landscape of California, we all have our own sphere of influence in which we live, and depending on where it is and what you engage in, you could be tribalized to a belief. A country bumpkin might be a mega liberal if they spend all of their time on Reddit, for instance. This thought is rather thin by itself, as it's pointless to pursue potentials like maybe they used this website. However, when combining that with attributing factors like gender, a clearer picture of social control starts to form. Generally speaking, living in a big city makes you more defensive and obsessive with tribalism as a result of a lack of trust that you have for all of the strangers that you need to tolerate from living in that city. But living in the country makes you an open-minded person who's more accepting of strangers because you're surrounded by those similar to you and you feel safe. This is true of every country and every culture, and it's the primary reason why immigrants form enclaves. Pack mentality is intrinsic to our bestial senses. That's actually the oddest part. What's happening right now is unnatural, at least from the Democrats' point of view. Cities automatically become Democrat. I said that earlier about Los Angeles, Hollywood, whatever. Yet now they've become socialists and communists. The conservatives being anti-immigration is obvious. It's also contrary to how I defined them, but those were in general terms. Now I'm looking at how they changed, and they became anti-immigration despite being open-hearted before, as they've seen an overindulgence in what created a problem for the country, over-immigration. Those country bumpkins aren't afraid of people with darker skin. They're afraid of tens of millions of people with darker skin immigrating in the span of a couple of decades. This is a natural change in the way conservatives are acting. But what are the Democrats doing? What's making them become tribalistic communists, despite living in a capitalist city? Well, it's propaganda, of course. It's unnatural change. Politicians have been selling propaganda to minority groups since time immemorial, but with the luxury of the modern white world, they are now able to sell something rather peculiar to the majority group instead of the minority group. And this strange gift offered by politicians was that of self-validation, virtue signaling, do-gooding, charity, pity. is what has created the confounding modern left, and their biggest voter base are the people most susceptible to emotional manipulation. No, not whites. Well, not just whites. Females. Especially white females. One of the most obvious yet often overlooked aspects of tribalism is genders. Males have no female friends, and females have no male friends. They never interact unless it's regarding lust, and as such, they form their own tribes. They don't get along with each other. Now, in the past, this was because men were off at work, so they never had any female friends because women didn't generally work. But now the story is more about social engineering, and I'm sure while men would want female friends, but as more and more women wear less and less clothing, the chasm widens and tribalism becomes more apparent. After all, how can you expect a man to be friends with someone who is trying to sexually arouse him with all of her clothing? And how can a woman be friends with a man when all of the political talking points teach women that men are violent monsters who hate women? We are then reduced to conversing through dating apps, and look at how well that's going. Then people take to their gender-specific echo chambers and talk about how the other gender is evil, without addressing the actual problems, or even attempting to, saying nothing more important than men bad or women bad with their complaints, instead of what they actually see as bad. They simply address them as something horrible, an insistence that the other party is mentally maligned against them, against their entire gender, their tribe. And there's one last tribe I'd like to talk about. Beyond gender, we have gender identities. A minor tribe, not inherently violent, and any interest in them is more like a fad, like a herpes outbreak. But their social weight has been amplified by social media and the political pity peddled by Democrats. What is interesting, however, is that gender identities are exactly the opposite of what they claim. A rainbow to represent each way of life? A single acronym where each letter boils down to homosexuality, thereby making the acronym sort of pointless. But sexuality is just that, isn't it? Regardless of what specific type it is, gay, trans, asexual, non-binary, or any of the other infinite number of neo-identities that people create on a minute-by-minute basis, they all serve a singular purpose. Not to include, but to divide. Very explicitly in this case, as we are talking about people who go out of their way to identify themselves as someone who will not mate or marry with people who are outside of their group. A tribe which has no intent of intermingling and would definitely mutter mudblood under their breath. Yet they band together with nothing besides a single self-gratifying purpose as their glue. Their tribe is like a mercenary band, bound not by blood, but money, and the moment the winds change, which I think they already have, the adhesive will strip away, and the raft will split apart. However, for now, oddly, LGBTQ plus, whatever the acronym is now, still remains a tribe. I know there's other examples, but those are just the big ones. At least the big ones as far as my feeble understanding allows. I mean, I'm just some random jackass, so don't take my word as validation or anything, but tribalism is obviously something that impacts any demographic, provided it hits with enough force, like a meteor. However, it's also idiotic to sit there, as many people do, and say that anyone from anywhere can be bad, and anyone from anywhere can be good. Well, that's completely true, but it ignores risks, and surviving through life is all about risk management. You're not Mr. Magoo, or if you prefer, Domino from the Marvelverse. You don't have the power of luck to protect you, and even if you did, what about everyone else impacted by your decisions? It's incredibly obvious that people who engage in tribalistic behavior cannot fit into the puzzle of civilization, and yet people continue to try. Whether it's an immigrant or social politics or even a god, people take a hammer and break its bones to force it into that empty spot. But once you're done, the puzzle looks like a child drawing.
What the hell is it supposed to be, a pelican or a school bus?
Looks like Muhammad Ali drew this.
What a dumbass. Hey, let's spit on it.
Whatever the tribe, it's clear that the tribals themselves don't want to assimilate, actively trying to segregate themselves in every way possible. Identity pronouns, religious paraphernalia, and sites of worship, ensuring that the black vote never intermingles and creates a half-breed, even including calls to return to Africa, which, again, like 99.9999999% of people are never even going to think about doing that. They're just going to say it. The risks posed by engaging with fringe mentalities as if they are normal is clear. It's practiced and documented. We have the receipts. We know what happens, whether it's teaching toddlers transgenderism or incorporating infinite immigrants. We know what happens when you teach kids that it's normal for women to exist in a perpetual state of hypersexualization. We know what happens when you protect gang mentality to avoid the bad optics that come from arresting the right person. Society decays. It degrades. Relationships are now unlikely to last. Even friendships are tough to find, let alone romantic. People murder each other over the wrong word or a hand on the shoulder. Tribals then leap to accusations. Victims as predators, predators playing victim, telling us that we need to interact with other people in a specific way described by foreign mentalities. The correct pronoun, the correct word, the correct tone, the correct boundaries, the correct God. Don't say Merry Christmas or you might be beheaded. That every interaction becomes a life or death situation simply because you might offend someone. That simply existing in your own country requires you walk on eggshells whenever you leave your house, and it gets worse as the noose of globalist inclusivity tightens by the hands of effeminate soy boys mushed by the whips of misandristic mistresses. Almost had it. Almost had that. Misandristic mistresses. That's like my fifth take. Look, I'm just going to go with it. Our very speech is now censored. Our devices monitored, our pleasures censured. It isn't working. It never worked. It won't work. Rather famous words attributed to a rather famous individual suggest that anyone who continues to perform the same experiment over and over is insane. It is clear the experiment failed. Anyone continuing with DEI, wokeness, inclusivity, and so forth in all its forms must then be insane. However, there's another aspect of this that Einstein, or whoever actually created that quote, didn't consider. That most people are simply incredibly stupid. The people chanting no borders, the people who claim men can get pregnant, the people who think the world can be fixed with just a little bit of mental health. They aren't insane. They're simply stupid. They are still pushing tribalism, but they've changed the experiment to be less subconscious. Now they're going for full control. It still won't work. It will just create more unrest, and that will only give the enemies of the state more opportunity. So, in summary, tribalism cannot be entirely stopped. Cities will become democratic. Men and women are, to some degree, different. People will acknowledge skin color, like it or not. Gender identities will create conflict even amongst themselves. Intelligence is the only way to close the gap. And last time I checked, everyone is becoming dumber. Maybe that's intentional, and maybe it's just coincidental. Maybe it's just an outcome of capitalism. Someone created something for money, and here we go. But considering that's the truth of it, at least by my discrimination, I say keep your friends close and your enemies out of knife range. Anyway, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed, please do the YouTube things.